Welcome back to BBN After Dark. Today we start our position previews for the 2024 season, and today we will start with the catcher position. Just me and KJ for this show here. Bernie unfortunately couldn't be here, but I do have his thoughts for some of these catchers. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I've got four different kind of categories of players that we're going to talk about today. And let's start with the first one, which is the superstars. Basically, how this show is going to go, we're going to talk about first each of these guys' 2023 season. Then we're going to talk about their kind of situation for 2024. You know, what team we think they're going to be on. Are they going to be a starter or maybe a bench player? And then we're going to talk about, at the end of the show, we're going to talk about our sleepers and breakouts going into the 2024 season. So let's start with the superstars. And for me, KJ, and maybe you have different thoughts, I think in terms of 2023, I think the superstar tier is one guy. And that's Ty Zazueta. I think there's not any other catcher I would put label as a superstar based on 2023. But maybe we can get your thoughts in a little bit. But let's start with Ty. I mean, this guy was a beast this year. I know he was in MVP form for several months of this season. Had, a little bit of a slow, like September to early October that kind of maybe knocked him out of MVP consideration, but still a very, very nice season. When you talk about this guy, really, offensively, he's a beast, but I think the number one thing about him is going to be that defense. I mean, this guy is just defensively, arguably the best catcher in the Bears. I think really you can't make another argument for any guy to be the best catcher in the Bears. And I think this guy is just an absolute stud. KJ, give me your thoughts on Ty in his 2023 season, and what do you think about Ty?
Yeah, like you said, Ty is in a league of his own at catcher. I don't know if we have a more complete catcher in the Bears, someone who is so good defensively, can do it with the bat, can run well, can hit for power. Ty kind of does it all. And I think sometimes he can get overshadowed with all the superstars in that Dalton lineup. But, I think as an individual, Ty is, one of the best all around players in the Bears, not only catcher.
Yeah, and for Ty, the last 3 years, you can kind of count on him to hit 300 with about a 10% extra base hit percentage at the plate. He's done it basically 3 years in a row. I mean, this guy, what else can you say about him? A beast offensively, defensively. This guy's fantastic. And then in terms of the status for him this season, obviously he's Dalton's starting catcher, and Dalton obviously one of the best teams in the entire Bears. Ty is going to bat in the top four of that order somewhere, usually two or three, and he's going to catch the majority of their innings. So not sure what else to say about Ty. This guy's a beast. So let's go ahead and move on to the next category. This one I think is a little bit more interesting in terms of some thoughts we have about these players. And I call this category the veterans. These are guys who are on top teams. They've been on top teams for probably a little while, and they have some pretty established roles on those teams. And let's go ahead and start with Dom Ahern. This is a guy who, KJ, I know at times you've thought very highly of. And when you look at his season, he was very, very good, a 106 OPS plus. And in terms of the guys we're going to talk about in this category, that was the highest OPS plus of any veteran catcher from last year. This guy, a big extra base hit percentage guy, does have a bit of a strikeout problem, but in terms of high upside offensive catcher, I think Dom Ahern is your guy. KJ, give me your thoughts on Dom Ahern and the season he had in 2023.
Yeah, Dom was really good, and I think it's always been a thing for Dom. If we can get him consistent, when he's at his best, he is one of the best catchers and one of the best players on that Floyd team. And I think that's what I've gotten from him this offseason. I've seen a lot of ups and downs, a lot of inconsistency. Sometimes he comes in a free swing looking like one of the best hitters. Sometimes he comes in a free swing looking like he hasn't swung a baseball bat in a while. So it's just about what Dom Ahern are you going to get? But no mistake, when he's locked in, he can be one of the best.
Yeah, and I think, for Dom going into the 2024 season, I think it's probably pretty safe he's going to be in the lineup. I think that's definitely safe. He's going to be in the lineup for sure. Whether it's going to be a catcher or maybe in the outfield, I think is still kind of up in the air. I think, Mac obviously has some several options for the catcher position. But in terms of offensively, I mean, this guy's a beast. I've said it many times on this show and, on BBN. The rarest thing in baseball is a catcher who can hit, and Dom Ahern is certainly a catcher who can hit. I mean, this is a guy who over the last couple years has just been, his stock has kept going higher and higher and higher. And now he's kind of out of that situation where, I think he's kind of not considered a young gun, prospect type player. He's more of an established guy now. And yeah, I'm excited for his 2024. KJ, talking about his kind of his progression from 2023 2024, what are your kind of expectations for Dom going into this new year?
You cut out. Who are you talking about?
Dom Ahern. We kind of talked about his 2023 season, but in terms of 2024, what are your kind of expectations for him? Do you see him taking a big step forward, or do you think it'll kind of be a similar type season? Which, if he has the same season last year, I think it's a success. But what are your thoughts on Dom Ahern's 2024 outlook?
Yeah, I've said on the show a lot. I'm a big fan of Dom Ahern, but if I'm being completely honest, he hasn't necessarily wowed me this offseason and put me in a position where I can say, he's going to take that next step. I think we know what we're going to get out of him. You're going to get a little bit of consistency, but when he gets right, he's gonna go on stretches where he looks like the best.
Yeah, and speaking of a guy who looks like the best in stretches, next guy we're going to talk about is Jack Roberts. And in terms of guys who could have been maybe in the superstar category, Jack Roberts, I think, is maybe closest to that in terms of these veterans. Jack came out really, really slowly in, early June, late May. He came out really slowly, but in the fall, I mean, he looked like vintage Jack Roberts. Extra base hit percentage up at 13.5%. He actually hit more extra base hits than he had strikeouts, and in his extra base hit percentage did come down from his breakout season. But I think in terms of an overall hitter, he was probably a little bit more solid than he was in his 2022 season. Maybe a little, the highs weren't quite as high, but I think the lows weren't quite as low for Jack Roberts. KJ, I know this is a guy who we talked about a lot going into last year, and I think he had a very solid season. Maybe, at least from my perspective, he didn't quite take the MVP step forward that I kind of hoped for him. I think he kind of got derailed a little bit by his high school season and some of the stuff they preach in high school ball. But KJ, give me your thoughts on Jack Roberts' 2023 season.
Yeah, like you said, I think high school ball had a lot to do with it. He just came in and they changed his whole approach, and it kind of put him in a funk for a while. But a lot like Dom Ahern, when this guy gets going, he is one of the best hitters on a really good team. I've seen Jack Roberts, look like an MVP at times. So, but again, I think Dom Ahern and him are good comparisons because again, he hasn't necessarily wowed me. I haven't seen enough from him all this offseason to prove he's going to take that next step. And he's going to have to prove with me, I think, early in the year. Does he come out slow again? Like he did in 2023 for 2024 before, we can really solidify him taking this game to the next level.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting for me in terms of his status for 2024. Obviously, going in as the second catcher for Dalton, you imagine he's going to be kind of the everyday EH or even play some outfield. But I think his role in the lineup's pretty solidified. He typically bats 5 or 6 for this team pretty consistently. And I do think the floor for Jack has gone up. In 2022, he was, again, high ceiling, low floor. And I do think whether maybe the ceiling hasn't quite, he hasn't quite reached that high level in terms of MVP. I do think he's not a bust contender. I do think at worst he's going to be 350 with a 950 OPS. I think that's kind of his floor as a player at this point. And I think if you're Ike Dalton, I think you're pretty happy with that because there still is that potential for him to just be a superstar. So Jack Roberts, certainly a interesting step. I don't know if you can call it a step forward last year because he wasn't quite as exciting as he was in 2022, but I do think maybe a mature step, maybe a mature kind of change in his career path to more of a safer option for that lineup. And I'll tell you what, speaking of safe high floor options, the next guy we're going to talk about is Brody Wilbur. This is a guy who had a 437 batting average last year and OPS plus over 100. So he was better than team average for his team. And this is a guy who, you know, I think the easiest comparison to make is 11-year-old Lucas Wilburn, who, again, not a lot of power, but is going to put the ball in play all the time. Very aggressive, doesn't walk very much, but at the end of the season, he's going to hit 450. And I think the power is a little bit more questionable. KJ, for 2023 for Brody Wilburn, I think, again, maybe not quite the big step forward we thought he could take in terms of the power, but still a very solid season. Again, hit around 440. KJ, give me your thoughts on Brody Wilburn's 2023 season.
Yeah, he was just reliable, and that's a team that needs reliable guys. They have some superstar power. They have the Harris Bolam, the Owen Lewis's. They have some superstars. They just needed reliable guys. A lot of that back half of that lineup was really unreliable, and I know for Bernie, Brody was a reliable piece of that lineup, and the pitching staff, and behind the plate. So I know Brody was really reliable for them, even though he didn't put up necessarily the superstar numbers.
Yeah, and defensively, I think, again, reliable is a great word. I think he's super solid defensively, especially at 12U. And I know Bernie has had some very high thoughts about Brody's defense going into this season. He thinks Brody's going to throw out some runners. And obviously, when you're talking about 12, 13U baseball, being able to control the run game as a catcher is just gigantic. I mean, it creates a huge advantage for those 12U teams who can limit the run game, even if it's just limiting stealing third. If you just keep guys at second, and I think Bernie is very confident Brody's going to do that. Looking at his 2022 to 2023 season, his extra base hit rate went down, as well as his strikeout. So to me, that kind of screams, a little bit more of a base hit approach. His walks went down as well. So he's swinging early in counts, kind of. I don't necessarily think he's just trying to put it in play necessarily, but I do think he's kind of trying not to strike out more than he is trying to hit a home run. And at least for 2024, I wonder if he's going to change that approach. To me, I think that I haven't really gotten the indication that Brody is going to try to make a change to be a big power hitter. I think you're going to get kind of the same thing. Again, 440, not a lot of power, not a lot of walks, and that's a solid player. No doubt that is a solid player. Looking at 2024, I think Brody's role is very safe. He is going to be the starting catcher for Burn still. And the question for me is going to be, is he more of a, solid 6, 7, 8 hitter, or could he take that step forward and be in the top 4 in the lineup? And I think that still remains to be seen. Next guy we're going to talk about, definitely a guy who had a breakout season in 2023. And later in the show, we talk about breakouts. I think maybe some of us might think he could take even another step forward in 2024, and that's Wyatt Poore. I mean, this guy, he had an OPS plus right below 100, which, on its surface, maybe isn't that impressive, but you got to remember the team he's playing on. 15U Floyd, arguably the best team in the Bears. Wyatt hit 397 last season, an extra base hit percentage right at 10%, and a strikeout rate just over 10%. So a very solid player, 2 home runs, double-digit doubles. This guy, I think, definitely, KJ, I think I can speak for myself, and I think for you as well, that Wyatt was much better in 2023 than we kind of thought. Not that we thought he was going to be bad, but I think both of us kind of thought he'd maybe, sink into a bench role with this 15U Floyd team, or maybe even be a defensive first catcher, but definitely was not the case. He had some big step forwards. KJ, give me your thoughts on Wyatt Poore's 2023 season.
Yeah. I know Wyatt Poore, he didn't necessarily have a loud spring, but he had a big time fall. And I know at the end of the year, on the best team in the Bears last year, that 15U Floyd squad, he was a 3-hitter. And like you said, no one really saw that coming. I know when I went out to coach, I subbed in for a weekend to coach that team, and he was marked as a 3-hitter. And I'm thinking, when did Wyatt Poore become this big time hitter? You just watch him, and he was really good in the fall, and Rob was a big fan of him. Rob preached highly of him starting last fall.
Yeah, and in terms of the 2024 outlook, he's the starting catcher for that 15U Floyd team. And when you look at what he's done in the Winter League, I mean, this guy could be in for a huge step in 2024. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of what Wyatt Poor did this last season, I think it was a great step forward for his development. I could have seen, I would not have been at all surprised if by the fall of 2023, Wyatt was down on Driscoll. You know, I wouldn't have been surprised if you would have told me last January that. I didn't expect that to happen, but it was not out of the realm of possibility. But for him to be the 3-hitter down the stretch and going into next season, he's going to be somewhere in the top 5 for that order. And again, we're talking about the most heavy order in the entire Bears. Obviously, very, very impressive for him. Moving into another veteran type player, this is your own catcher, KJ, Judd Levy. You know, Judd, I think when you're talking about him, he's kind of got that Brody Wilburn thing going where he's always going to be solid. You know, defensively, he's solid, never going to hurt you. Offensively, he's solid. You know, he's not quite that superstar level talent with the bat, but I do think, at least from my perspective, I can't speak for you, KJ. You've obviously seen him a lot more than me, but I've coached him in the BWL now 2 years in a row. He does happen to come through in some big spots. You know, I'm not a big believer in clutch hitters. You know, I think if you're good in one situation, you're basically good in all situations. But I do think Judd does step his game up a little bit in those clutch situations. Um, you know, for him, I would say a little bit of a down offensive year last year. He was not quite the offensive player that he was in 2022. You know, his batting average dropped about 140 points. You know, his extra base hit rate went down. His strikeout rate went up. So I do think it was a little bit of a down year offensively for Judd. But KJ, for you, first, let's just talk about his 2023 season. Again, not quite the offensive season you maybe could have expected from him. But what do you think about Judd's overall contributions in 2023?
Yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of up and downs. You know, and really, he's good enough defensively. And at 13U, you know, you don't need a catcher that's throwing out runners at second base. You need a guy who's not going to allow drop their strikes. You need guys going to catch the ball. And you know, bonuses. Jetty calls a great game. You know, I don't have to call pitches when Jetty's back there catching. He limits the run game coming to third. He limits pass ball. So he's great defensively, and how good he is defensively. You know, can cover for inconsistencies with the bat. And, you know, Juddy went on stretches where he's the 3-hitter, you know, and then he goes on stretches where he's a 10-hitter. So, you know, it's just about finding consistency for him. And, you know, I think in the spring, much better than the fall. So just finding consistencies and you know, I've seen some good stuff in this Winter League in this offseason to prove, you know, that he's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, and KJ, you know, I want to kind of look at his 2024 outlook, and I do think to start the season, he's definitely the starting catcher. You know, you've got guys coming up like Garrett Knight and like Josh Kinsey who are catchers and could potentially maybe late in 2024 threaten Judd for his job. But I definitely think defensively, he's far enough ahead of those two guys that it's not really going to matter early in the season. I think Judd's a starting catcher coming out the gate. And then maybe if he doesn't perform well, you know, if these offensive numbers stay in that direction, maybe you're talking about him kind of losing that job later in the year. But I think to open the year, he's definitely the catcher. I do want to ask you, KJ, you know, I'm looking at his, you know, career page right now. 13 extra base hits in 2021. 19 extra base hits in 2022, and then last year just 8. So, you know, over, you know, more than half reduction there. And the other number, KJ, that kind of does worry me, his walk rate doubled last year. And sometimes that can be an okay thing when your walk rate doubles, but to me, that kind of screams being passive, maybe being a little bit scared. So KJ, do you think there's a path for Judd to kind of get back on the right track offensively, or what do you think about these numbers about Judd's, you know, last offensive season?
Yeah, I think last year, you know, it was a lot more of a mental roller coaster than you know, the physical. You know, I think Jetty got very non-confident after, you know, getting moved down in the order. You know, he went from a role of being, like I said, you know, 3, 4, 5 hitter to a role of 10 hitter. Sometimes he wasn't starting in the lineup. So I think that really, you know, messed with his mental. I think he was really pressing hard late in the year, and you know, he got in a point of where, hey, you know, I just want to go up there and try not to strike out. And if that means walk, if that means, you know, I can't hit extra base hits and I just got to try to walk, that's what I'm going to do. And I think he got in that state. and that's why he went on those stretches. But I think now at this point, the lineup's so good, and Judd knows, Judd can play actually a younger age, and he knows if he goes down to Burnsville, he's a 3-4 hitter. I mean, he knows that. If he goes onto a lot of 13U teams in the city, he's the 4-5 hitter. But we're so loaded, and I think Judd understands. Putting him at the bottom of the order, that's not an insult to Judd. It's just the lineup's so deep, and I think he's going to come into the year. He's not expecting to be, in a key spot in the lineup, and he can just play with no pressure. And I think having no pressure, batting towards the bottom of the order where, you don't expect him to be the superstar, and he comes in the year, not feeling that pressure, and he can just, play his game at the bottom of the order. I think that's really going to help Judd.
Yeah, and another guy who is a big veteran in the Bears who's been around a long time, that's Reese Payne. Obviously going into his last summer season with the Bears. In terms of Reese's career, I mean, definitely a rags to riches story. This guy was on our third or even fourth level team when he joined back in, I think, 2018 or 2019. He joined the Bears. And since then, it's been a nice rise to the top team and now, into the top 5 of the order. And at times, he's hit cleanup. He's hit 3. So it was a career high extra base hit percentage for Reese Payne this last season, a career high in doubles, but it was also a career high strikeout rate. And I do think a lot of that is the schedule he played. I mean, our 18U Floyd team last year played a really tough schedule, probably the toughest schedule a Bear team's ever played. So I do think that kind of reflects in the strikeout rate, but I do think the power was a great scene for him. His on base percentage was also a career high. So even though he, maybe was striking out a little bit more, he was still finding ways to get on base against these good pitchers. So a career high extra base hit rate, a career high on base percentage. I think you could argue this is one of Reese Payne's best years in his entire career. KJ, give me your thoughts about Reese Payne's 2023 season.
Yeah, I think the struggle for that team was finding guys to back up Brennan and Mac. And I think at times, Reese Payne was that guy to step up and do it. He hit multiple home runs. Obviously, he plays a good catcher. The pitchers love pitching to him. And that got him a lot more opportunities, even when, the offense might have struggled a little bit. How good he is behind the plate, got him more opportunities. And, just the threat that, this guy can hit a ball, 350 plus feet at any point is good enough to get him in the lineup.
Yeah, and definitely KJ, I did want to highlight his defense because he is a very good defensive catcher. I feel like he doesn't get enough credit for his framing and his pitch calling, because obviously those are two overlooked areas of the game, but I really do appreciate Reese's pitch calling for sure. I think he makes his pitchers better. I think Mac's breakout season on the mound, I think a lot of that you could credit to Reese Payne because Reese does a great job of putting his pitchers in the best position to succeed. Again, I think he set up himself for a monster senior season to kind of end off his Bear career, and I think it was a great one. So huge credit to Reese Payne, a longtime Bear. I hope he, gets to some milestones, looking for double-digit home runs in his career this season. He could potentially get to 200. He's definitely going to get to 200 hits. He could get to 50 doubles, so a lot of milestones in his career this season. So very excited for Reese Payne. 2024, he's a starting catcher for 18U Floyd, no doubts about it. So very excited for Reese Payne's season. Next up here, I got 2 more guys in the veteran category, starting with Quinn Steinbeck. This guy's always been known as a defensive specialist, and I will say he had some moments last season where he was a really good offensive player. He spent about a month and a half in the 5-hole where he was just putting up great at bat after great at bat. And then he kind of slumped off, especially in the fall. He really struggled offensively. But I think this guy's defense speaks for itself. Obviously, we're talking about this is the catcher preview, so we're not really talking about their pitching. But Quinn is obviously a monster pitcher on the mound as well. And KJ, when you're talking about Quinn, I do think the stat page does not do him enough justice because defensively, he's really, really influential. He's a great, verbal leader as well, and he does do a great job with the pitchers. But KJ, give me your thoughts on Quinn Steinbeck's 2023 season.
Yeah, I think I don't watch much of Quinn Steinbeck's at bats. I know what he does behind the plate. I know how good of a leader he is. You can kind of put him anywhere. You can put him in the outfield, you can put him in the infield, you can put him at catcher, you can put him at pitcher, and you can put him at the plate, and he's going to do his job. I don't think he has that superstar ability where he's going to change a game, but he's not going to ever lose you a game, and he's only going to, benefit with what he does. You know, I think this guy, he's the attitude you need on a team. Now, if you had 12 of his attitude, you'd be in trouble. But having a guy like Quinn Steinbeck, it's so important, and it's deeper than the stats.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a guy who's going to keep his teammates accountable. You what you can't doubt about Quinn, you can't doubt the work ethic, and you can't doubt that he cares. He wants to win games, he wants to win tournaments, and he wants to contribute. At a high level. So you can't doubt that about Quinn. I do think there is potential for his bat to really take a big step forward. This season. Because it's not a swing problem. There's nothing wrong with his swing mechanics that he just swings and misses all the time. It's big thing is his approach, and obviously he's got to get bigger and stronger. And I think he's done a lot of things this offseason to accomplish both of those. I mean, he has not missed a workout all winter long. He hasn't missed a practice. KJ, I don't know if you work his free swing, but as far as I know, he's never missed a free swing. He doesn't miss pitching, so he's always there, and he's taking every step to kind of be that guy to really improve his offensive game. And his defense and pitching is so good, it's going to keep him on the top team regardless. And I think if he can be a good hitter, that's just going to be bonus for this 14 Floyd squad. Going into 2024, unlike, kind of, and I think KJ, you kind of run a catcher committee as well a little bit. But I think, you more have a number one and number two. For a long time, I've had two catchers. I like having two catchers who kind of split the workload. So I think Quinn is going to split the workload with Joey Burgess, a guy we're going to talk about later. So he's going to catch half the games every weekend, and again, I think whatever he gives you at the plate is just a bonus because of whatever, everything else he adds to the game. The last guy in the veteran category is James Moore. James, I think, again, I don't necessarily think game changer or the stats kind of show his value. He is playing kind of like Judd. He is playing a year up where he could potentially play for that Kreitler squad. And I think, this going into this season, I think he'll probably play both a lot of the year. I think he will play for that Kreitler squad a lot. But last season, James, I think his defense really does kind of shine, talking about the younger ages, especially at 10U, being able to limit drop their strikes is huge. And I think James does a great job of that. But KJ, I know you've got a chance to look at this guy a lot, especially on Tuesday nights at youth prep practice. Give me your thoughts on James Moore this offseason he's having.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first guys in this category I can really say, and maybe it's just because I haven't watched James Moore enough. But I watched him a good amount before this season, and I think he's one of the guys I can confidently say in this category has taken a big step this offseason. I haven't seen him play a lot for the last couple of years until this year, but I've had him in free swing for a long time. And the thing with James look like sometimes in free swing, he's just trying to put the ball in play, trying to hit the ball. And I've had him so far in youth prep and those practices, and he's swinging with much more reckless abandonment. And, almost a good thing. For some guys, they're swinging out their shoes. It's a bad thing. To see James Moore do it, that's a great sign for me. It looks like he's not afraid, trade out some strikeouts for some bombs. And I think James Moore is going to hit some bombs this season. He looks really locked in. He's swinging hard, and he's hitting the ball hard. And, the rate he's made contact, if he can keep that contact rate, I think James Moore's in for a big season.
Yeah, definitely. I think James Moore, again, kind of like Quinn, you can't doubt the hard work and you can't doubt the want from James Moore. As far as I know, KJ, I see him at the Bud Dome all the time. I don't know. I mean, you could probably speak more to if he's missing practices. As far as I know, James is pretty involved. I see James all the time. His parents, I think, are really dedicated to turning James into a very good baseball player. And I think right now he's solid. And listen, at that age, again, James is playing 11U, but he could play 10U. And at that age, the biggest things, is he working hard and does he love baseball? And I think both those things are an emphatic yes for James Moore. So I think only good things in store for him in the future. And I'm really excited to see what comes of James Moore's career. This next category of guys, I'm going to call the depth category, and we're going to go through this group a little bit quicker. I think there's kind of, these guys are basically guys who are debatable if they're going to be top team guys or second team guys. Some of these guys haven't quite, you know, made their strides as Bears yet. They're still, I got a couple of rookies in this group as well. And guys who definitely, you know, although are making strides in their game, maybe are a little bit more unsure than the group that we just talked about. And I'm going to kind of split these into groups. We're going to start with these three guys. I think these three are in a category, all 15U guys, veterans, guys who have been in the Bears for a couple years now, guys who, I think all have upside in their own right. And KJ, all three of these guys, I think you may want to talk about, but I'll go ahead and run through each of them briefly, KJ, and then I'd like you to pick one of them that you kind of want to expand on. So the three guys are Alex Ruppel, Jude Blattner, and Caden Benner. All three of these guys hit between 360 and 380, so very similar offensive stats. All three of these guys, had a respectable amount of extra base hits. Jude, I think, is the power hitter of the three. And all three of these guys, I think, going into the 2024 season, you're looking at either starters on Driscoll or the bench on Floyd. And all three of these guys made appearances on Floyd last year. So I think any, could be true. Any of these three guys could make Floyd this season. But KJ, for you, looking at these three guys, Alex Ruppel, Jude Blattner, and Caden Benner, which of them would you like to kind of more expand on?
Yeah, I'll touch on Alex Ruppel. I think this guy goes through flashes where, he never looks like a superstar. If you watch him play, he's kind of, I kind of want to say awkward. His movements are awkward, but this guy just produces. He is just a flat out ball player. He can pitch, he can hit, he can catch. I mean, this guy can do a little bit of everything. He's not a bad outfielder either. If you just looked at, he doesn't necessarily pass the eye test. But if you watch Alex Ruppel play, this guy has all the qualities of a superstar player. And I think I know Rob is a huge fan of Alex Ruppel, and he sees that, that Alex isn't necessarily passing the eye test, but, he just produces. And I know Alex made probably the most out of those three appearances on the Floyd squad. And I think that's how it's going to be again this upcoming season. Just by how good of an offseason Alex Ruppel has had. And never a guy who's going to miss stuff. A guy who's had a big BWL season. And I don't think Alex Ruppel has done anything to hurt his stock, which was already at a good place before the season started, offseason.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I'm excited to see what all three of those guys kind of make of their 2024 seasons, because I do think it's a big season for all three of them. Obviously, all starting their high school, careers this year. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of changes them. But I'm excited for all three of those guys. This next group of guys is more of the, probably not going to make top team right now, but could potentially in the future if they really, kind of keep their development going. These three guys are Thomas Langeke, Chase Bottoms, and Caden Fenberg. I think all three of these guys have big positives to their game. Thomas Langeke has always been a very good offensive catcher. Caden Fenberg, I think, has shown a lot of good defensive skills, and also, obviously the hard work. And I think Chase Bottoms has shown that, he is willing to work hard. He is willing to do what it takes to kind of get there. I think an injury kind of derailed, his off season and even, late into the fall. But I do think all these guys have potential. KJ, between these three, I think looking at 2024, I think obviously all three are not going to be on the top teams from the get-go, for sure. But I do think all three of them have potential to, in the future, be a top team guy. KJ, which of these three would you like to kind of expand on?
Yeah, I'll say between the three, one really stands out to me, and a guy who's had a great offseason, in my opinion, is Caden Fenberg. This guy has just that mentality you want. He's not going to throw guys out behind the plate, but he's a pretty good blocker. He's pretty good at blocking. He's not going to hurt you calling games. And this guy just has so much grit and his at bats. If you tell him to go up, and do something, he's going to do it for you. And he's just got a lot of grit, man. He's got a lot of heart. And I think that's what you want from, your bench guys. You want a guy who's going to come in and just have heart and have grit and not going to hurt you. He's very good, I think, on the bases. He swings hard at the plate. I think he's only going to get better offensively. And he's already pretty solid defensively, and he can play a couple different spots for you. He's got that mentality for an outfielder. I know he's more known as a catcher, and we're talking about him as a catcher, but in the outfield, he's got the mentality, man, where he's willing to lay his body on line, and he's the same way at catcher, and he's the same way a hitter. He's willing to do anything to win, to compete, and I thought Caden Finberg's had a great offseason.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, nobody has ever doubted his work ethic. I mean, this guy is a competitor. You know, people probably don't remember, but he was picked up in BWL last year and was a very solid role player for that team. You know, even though he wasn't quite ready, this year he's been a very significant player. He's caught a lot of innings, especially with some hard throwers. He's caught Jaden Coleman. He's caught Alex Ruppel. And I think that's only going to make him better going into this year. KJ, I did want to ask, you know, kind of for a prediction here. In 2022, his first full season with the Bears, he hit 179. Last year, he hit 292. And KJ, with what you've seen from him this offseason, what do you think is a realistic kind of batting average you think you could see Caden having in 2024?
Yeah, I think he's going to have a consistent spot on, whatever, Baylor, Kreitler, whatever that, lower team he's on. He's going to have a consistent spot. And I think he's going to be relied on a lot more than he was in past seasons. And I think that's going to do nothing but increase Caden's confidence. And not only has he gotten better physically, but I think he's gotten sharper mentally. He's gotten more confident. And I think he gets into the 300s. I think he could, push 350 possibly. By how he's looked this offseason.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Then the last two names I have in the depth category are two names, both rookies in the Bears this year, both who I think, are definitely new to this level of baseball. Both are guys who I think have definitely shown that they have a lot of work to do, but I definitely think in both cases they have shown they're willing to put in the work. Whatever you can say about these two guys, you can't say they don't show up every week and try to get better. And that's Michael Heine and Lucas Brown. These are two guys who, again, still very early on in their baseball development, obviously both coming from recreational teams and now trying to transition into tournament players. And I think for both of these guys, I think the future is bright. Neither of these guys hit over 200 last year, and I think that'll change for both of them. And between the two of them, they had one extra base hit last year, and I think that number will multiply going into this season. But KJ, for you, pick one of these guys, Michael Heine or Lucas Brown, that you kind of want to expand on here.
Yeah, I'll touch on Lucas Brown. He's a lot older than Heine, has a lot less time, to get better than Michael Heine does. But I give Lucas Brown a lot of credit. He is behind a great majority of the 18U guys. And he still comes out every single week and competes and is out there at practice every single week. I don't think he's missed a practice. And he's competing out there. And I give him a lot of credit for that. It's not easy to do that. It's not easy to know, you're going to be one of the least experienced players out there and still show up every single week. And I think Lucas Brown's done that. Now, I know he can catch. I think that's going to get him more opportunities. To be honest, he's not great in the infield, but I think his bat is going to get opportunities as well. He has a lot of power. I'm not saying this guy's going to come out and hit 400 with, 5-10 home runs. But he has a good amount of power. I think he does hit one out over the fences this year. And it shows me a lot, how strong he is mentally, that he's, keeps coming out. He's going to compete. And he really wants to get better. And I think for a guy like Lucas at this stage in his career, he has nothing to lose, and he's going to put it all on the line this season.
Yeah, 100%, KJ. I agree with everything there. And then I think you could say a lot of the same things about Michael Heine. I think this is a guy who, again, probably get to that 14U practice. He knows he's probably one of the, if not the most, least experienced guys there. And he continues to show up. So I do think a bright season ahead for both these guys. I think they're both going to take significant steps forward, and I'm excited for both of them. The final category I have here are what I call the up-and-comers. These are guys who are either rookies or getting their first real shot at the top team this year, potentially. I think all of these guys are either going to start day one on the top team or will get a chance eventually in 2024. Some high in prospects here, some guys who I think are getting their first real shot at the top team, and some guys I wanted to talk about here. So let's go ahead and start with the first two names. These are two of the highest profile guys. One of these guys is our number one prospect in the Bears. The other one is a former top 5 prospect in the Bears, and that's Joey Burgess and Garrett Knight. I think you could say there are a lot of similarities between these two. Both are offensive catchers. Not that they're bad catchers at all. Joey and Garrett both have made huge strides defensively, but both are on this list for their bats. Garrett, I think, has had a little bit more tournament success than Joey. Obviously Joey's had some big moments, but if you look at the overall numbers, Garrett was maybe a little bit more successful than Joey last season. But I do think they both have enormous upside. KJ, looking at these two guys, do you see the similarities between the two of them? And what are your thoughts about them for 2024?
Yeah, there is a lot of similarities between the two. Like you said, they're both offensive catchers, both big time power hitters, both at the top. You know, they might both be number one. I know Garrett Knight is, but they could be both at the top of the exit velocity boards for the offense or for their ages. Do you know if Joey is?
Um, Trying to
I know
think if
Joey's at
Joey.
97 miles an hour.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what Parker L's is. I think Parker L's at like 94, right? So I think Joey would be number one.
So, looking at that, Garrett Knight and Joey are both the top exit velos of their ages. They're both big in size. But like you said, they're both inexperienced. And I think, like you said, Garrett Knight has done it more at the tournament level. I think Garrett Knight, flipped the switch last year, so quickly. And it's something I don't know if I've ever seen. And I don't know if it'd be fair to expect, Joey to do the same as Garrett Knight did. But saying that, I mean, Joey Burgess is way better than Garrett Knight was when Garrett Knight was on the bottom team. Um, you know, if I'm being honest, I think Joey Burgess, I don't think we're just talking about him, to take this big step. I don't, talking about him to be a big time catcher. I think Joey Burgess, is going to win an MVP award. I mean, this guy hits the ball so far, so hard. It comes off his bat, so good. If it comes off his bat, it comes off his bat differently than a lot of hitters. I'm the biggest fan of Joey Burgess this offseason. I think he's taking huge steps this offseason. He works hard. He's solid in the outfield. He's solid at catcher. I think he's going to slot into that 14U lineup, and he's going to go crazy. I think, I said this last year about Braden Miller, and he had a lot of home runs. He didn't quite get there where I predicted, possibly double digit. I know we hit 3 or 4. I'm predicting Joey Burgess to get double digit, and I feel better about it than I did about Braden Miller. And Joey Burgess has a higher exit velocity than he did. I think Joey Burgess does get to that number. He puts the ball in the air much better than Braden Miller had as well at that point. Garrett
Yeah.
Knight again.
Sorry, KJ, go ahead. Go ahead.
For Garrett Knight, this guy, I think in the fall he had a big time fall, but still, there was a lot of growth to be done. He swung at crazy pitches sometimes, and he's gone into this winter, and he's became much more mature. He's disciplined at the plate. He's gotten much better behind the plate. He's much quicker behind the plate, which is something we don't talk about really with catchers. He's quick. He's much quicker back there. He's gotten pretty good at first base. His exit velo has gone way up since the fall. And he had a couple home runs in the fall. I think he also is going to hit multiple home runs this coming season. And, he's doing nothing to tell me, he's not going to get even better from this. He's never stopped working hard. He's in every single program imaginable like Joey is. I think both these guys, we're not talking about both these guys being, top catchers. I think both these guys are going to be in the conversation for us, top 10 in the MVP votes.
Yeah, I mean, this could arguably be two guys who are hitting top 4 in their lineups. These could be, there is a world where these two guys are the best hitters on their teams. I think that seems crazy now. Garrett obviously has to jump ZZ and Diego. Joey's got to jump guys like Parker Ells and Lucas Wilburn. But I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world that these are at least power-wise, the best two hitters on their team. So I don't think that's out of the ordinary. So yeah, definitely KJ. I agree with everything you said there. Joey, I do think needs to take the similar transformation that Garrett did in terms of maturity. But I agree. I think Joey is definitely talent-wise, Joey's further ahead than Garrett was. when Garrett was a rookie, or not a rookie, but a prospect, and Joey looking to make his first outing in the top team this year. These next two guys are guys who definitely, I think, have put in a lot of work. For one of these guys, he's a rookie. The other one, not quite a rookie. I think he's a second or third year player, but a guy who has definitely put the work in. I think's had a nice offseason. These two guys are Andrew Kahlberg and Gunnar Wilson. I think both these guys, Andrew, I think, is definitely very clear. He's going to be the starting catcher for that burn squad at 16U. Gunnar Wilson, I think he's going to be a bench guy for that 15U Floyd roster. And I debated putting Gunnar in the outfield, but I do think he is going to catch a lot for that 15 Floyd team. So, KJ, with these two guys, I think, a lot of similarities between them in terms of I do think they both kind of have a little bit of questions offensively that they're trying to solve. I do think they both have potential as offensive options. But, KJ, give me your thoughts on these two guys, Andrew Kahlberg and Gunnar Wilson.
Yeah, I'll start with Andrew Kahlberg. He's a guy who came in the BWL. I'm not sure if he was drafted or not. I don't think he was. He was picked up, and he's just a guy who came in the BWL. He's earned himself way more playing time for the throwbacks in the BWL. I mean, he does take good at bats, and he is facing better pitchers than he's ever faced at his level. And I think defensively, Kahlberg's always been very good, and he's always been highly regarded defensively. He's a guy who can go out there, catch multiple every game a weekend for you. He's gonna block. He can throw out runners. I think Kahlberg's really good back there, and he's always been known defensively. And I think his offense has taken a much needed big step this offseason. Like I said, he's hitting off players who he's never faced before. Not even close to the talent he's accustomed to, and he's put up great at bats against them. I think Kahlberg's offense takes a big rise this coming season, whatever team he's on. As for Gunnar Wilson, like Kahlberg. Gunnar is the best defensive option at his age. There's a lot of good catchers. I would take him defensively over Wyatt Poore, who is highly regarded. I would take him defensively over Alex Ruppel. Gunnar Wilson is very good behind the plate. He's got a better arm than both those guys. I think he calls a really good game as well. But there's question marks around his bats. And what I've seen, I think his bat has taken a big step this offseason. He's gotten into free swing, and he's really bought into the approach. I think he might have been a free swinger last year, but he didn't necessarily buy into the approach last year. He is pulling the ball hard this offseason. I think we've seen it in BWL. He was drafted to be a catcher, to just catch. He wasn't drafted necessarily to be a hitter, and he's worked himself into that lineup on one of the best teams in the BWL. So I think both these guys take big steps. Both these guys are defensive catchers, but both take big steps in the offensive categories.
Yeah, I 100% agree, KJ. I think both these guys have a lot of potential. I do think it was a little disappointing, at least for me. I was very high on Andrew Kahlberg going into last season, and he didn't quite have the offensive jump that I wanted him to have. I think he hit like 240 in 2022 and then hit about 280 in 2023. So definitely a step forward, but it wasn't quite as big as I hoped. But I do think he's worked at another level this offseason. I think he's put even more on the line this year, and I do think he could have his real breakout season. The final two names I want to touch on in the catcher preview, again, two guys who I believe both are in their rookie season with the Bears. Neither, I think, is going to start the season with the top team, but I do think both has the potential to make the top team at some point in the 2024 season. And I do think these two guys are in very similar boats. And they are Gabe Brown for 12U Burnstill and Josh Kinsey for 13U Floyd. I think these two guys are very similar into the regards that they're very, new to tournament baseball. I think they've both taken huge strides over the past 3 or 4 months, and I think they both have a lot of potential, especially offensively. So, KJ, give me your thoughts on these two guys, Gabe Brown and Josh Kinsey.
Gabe Brown, really to start the off season, he really impressed me, and he was a free swing guy, and it's just unleashing his power, and I think we started to do that at the beginning of the offseason, finally get some of his power numbers going and his power swing. him not being afraid, get out, him swinging with that recklessness, abandonment, to put balls over the fence. I think he started to do that at the beginning of the offseason. And, whether it was because, maybe he switched going to free swing nights, maybe he's out of free swing now, maybe he's still in free swing, but I haven't necessarily seen him since in my free swing. So I don't know if he's still coming with that approach. You'll have to talk to Bernie more about, Gabe Brown, but I know going into the offseason, I was a big fan of him. And he got picked up in the BWL. And I think, he's going to slot into a, like you said, he's not going to start on top team, but I think he's going to play a big role on that second team. And if he can show he can put up power numbers, I mean, he's going to get a quick call to Bernie's team. Bernie needs another big time power hitter, to back up a guy like Harrison Blowbaum. And I think Gabe Brown can be that guy. But he's really got it on leash. And for the other guy, Josh Kinsey, Josh Kinsey is kind of the opposite. Going into the offseason, I didn't think of Josh Kinsey much going into the offseason. I mean, to be honest with you, in the fall, he didn't have a great fall. And not just stats wise, not just games wise, but practice wise. I didn't think he really impressed me in the fall. But in the last month or so of the offseason, he's taken his work ethic to another level. He's hopped in free swing. I know he's been a member of pitching. He's always in catching. And I'm starting to see this guy, 6 times a week at the Bud Dome. And I think the last thing for Josh Kinsey, he needs, to find consistency with the bat. And now we've seen flashes where Josh Kinsey has hit some big time balls, but it's finding consistency there. I think he's going to be a solid catcher. He's shown he can play a good first base as well. And I don't think he's going to hurt you at catcher. I don't think he's going to be throwing out runners, but I don't think he's going to hurt you. I think he's going to catch the ball and he's going to block most of the ball. He's not going to allow drop third strikes. But always, catcher is always a thin position, always a position of need. And Josh Kinsey's, last month has shot him up in my stock. I think, this guy does end the spring season on the top team. I think he does make appearances on the top team throughout that off season or this coming season. And, I think if he can find, the consistency with the bat, he can absolutely buy into what we're doing offensively. It's hard to say, Josh Kinsey doesn't compete in the fall to win a first base job or a catcher job.
Yeah, and I do think, going back to Gabe Brown, I do think the defense is a little more questionable. But I think the offense is where you see his big kind of upside as a player. And then, yeah, KJ, I second everything you said about Josh Kinsey. I mean, I honestly didn't even know his name, kind of going through the fall season. Like he was always that kid at practice, who I didn't really pay much attention to. Over the last couple months, though, I would say the last 6 to 8 weeks, I mean, this guy's put his name on the map. And he was not a top 50 prospect when we did our list in November. I can guarantee you he's going to be in the top 50 when we do our list again in March. So 100%, I agree with everything you said there. So let's go ahead and end the show here with our sleepers and breakouts. And KJ, we've talked about all of these players already, so you don't need to go very in depth here. Just kind of give your case here for your sleeper or breakout. I have Bernie's as well. And I will say, this doesn't always happen. Last year there were several sleepers KJ gave that I probably wouldn't have gave. There were several breakouts Bernie gave that maybe I didn't feel like. I will second every single one of these players. We're going to talk about 6 players here, 3 sleepers, 3 breakouts. And I would agree with any of them. So just to put that out there. So let's go ahead and start with the sleepers. A sleeper is a player who is going to be a little more under the radar. He's a guy who maybe most people don't really understand the value of, who's going to have a very sneakily good season. I'll go first. I'm going to go with Josh Kinsey. You just talked about him. I think this guy has a lot of upside. I think he's come a long way. I've said this before. If you want to get me excited about you, be big and strong and be a hard worker. And I think Josh is definitely hammers home both those things. I think Josh could come into the season and maybe not to the same level, but I do think he could have a Garrett Knight-esque kind of breakout season where he goes from being a player who looks like he's never played tournament baseball before because he hasn't and turn into a very good prospect. I don't think it'll be the same level of jump as Garrett Knight, but I do think it'll be the same type of jump as Garrett Knight. That's kind of my Josh Kinsey sleeper case. KJ, who's your sleeper at the catcher position?
Yeah, I'm going to a guy I touched on, Gunnar Wilson. I think his defense is going to force him to get some more starts on the Floyd roster. and he's going to take care of business with the bat when he gets those opportunities. And I think by the end of the year, he's platooning with Wyatt Poor. One of them's EH, one of them, or Wyatt Poor maybe moves to EH. Wyatt Poor can play outfield as well, and Gunnar Wilson becomes the full-time catcher for that squad.
And then Bernie's sleeper is going to be Alex Ruppel. We've talked about this guy. I think he, no matter how he looks, I think he manages to get things done. And I think for Alex Ruppel's sleeper case, I think he's going to be one of those guys who's either a superstar on Driscoll or he's going to be more of a role player on Floyd. And I think Bernie with this, he's kind of thinking he's going to be that superstar on Driscoll and be that guy who kind of surprises people, kind of like Kobe Kennedy last year. So that's kind of the sleeper case for Alex Ruppel. A breakout is a guy who's going to go from one tier and jump 1 or 2 tiers higher. For me, the tiers are prospect, role player, starter, star, superstar. So there are 5 tiers. I think each of these guys is kind of in a different level. Starting with my breakout, I'm going to go with Wyatt Poor. Definitely Wyatt Poor was in that starter tier last year. I think he's going to be a star and possibly even a superstar going into the season. I think he's shown me so much in the BWL and just in the fall last year that I think this guy is the real deal. And this guy just doesn't take a bat at bat. I think he's going to be a real shocker to some people with how good he is next season. So I'm going to go Wyatt Poor. KJ, who's your breakout at the catcher position?
Yeah, I'm going to go to Joey Burgess, and I'm not just predicting this guy is going to break out as a catcher. He's going to be one of the best hitters in the Bears next season. He's going to hit double-digit home runs. He's going to be a monster in a monster lineup of 14U Floyd. Joey Burgess is my pick. He's pretty good defensively as well. He's got a big-time arm, but his bat is really where he's going to stand out.
Yeah, and again, second that, KJ. If you didn't pick him, I definitely would have. And then Bernie's breakout, he's going to go with Garrett Knight. For Garrett, I think toward the end of the season, he was definitely that role player category, and I think Bernie kind of expects him to be definitely a starter, if not a star, if not a superstar. I think you could see Garrett really jump up 3 tiers here. And like KJ said earlier, Garrett has, his maturity at the plate has really kind of catapulted him from a, high ceiling, but he's going to strike out a lot to this guy could be the real deal. I've said before that I think he could arguably, you could say, has a higher ceiling than Diego Buccio. I think he's a little bit more mature, potentially, not yet, but potentially. I think he could even be a little bit more mature than Diego and be right up there with ZZ and Diego going into next season. So that's going to do it for our catcher preview. Again, this is the start of our positional previews. We'll move on to first base next week. And, this is a real chance for us to kind of go in depth on a ton of different players. I mean, we're going to say every Bear player's name over the next 8 weeks as we go through every position. We will have a youth prep show, so we'll get a chance to touch on those guys, but definitely 11U and above. We're going to talk about every single player in the Bears, so very excited for that. But that's going to do it for this episode of the BBN After Dark. KJ, thank you so much for joining me. Bernie will be on the first base preview going into next week, so if you missed him, don't worry, he'll be right back. That's going to do it for this episode of the BBN After Dark, and we'll talk to y'all next time.